summarize your basic military history. But what I'd like you to begin doing is first, if you could say your full name and the units while you served with the 10th, and when you entered and left military service.
Okay, name is Norman Welburn Dorsey. And
You're from the, what unit?
I was headquarters of the 87th Mountain Infantry, 10th Mountain Division. Then the 87th headquarters the entire time I was in the service after basic training, which I took at Camp Roberts.
And that's located in what state?
California.
Mm-hmm.
And from there I went to the 87th. We took our amphibious training as a combat group, and there at Fort Ord, California. A lot of blood for California. And from there we went to the Aleutian Islands, going to ADAC first, and then preparing for the invasion of Kiska. And I was part of the invasion of Kiska, which was a tragic experience in some respects. But and from there we came back to the States and was joined by the 85th and 86th, completed division, and took training there at Camp Hale, Colorado. And from Camp Hale, Colorado, we went out to Texas. No mountains, plenty of nice warm sunshine for the troops to enjoy, and we took training there. From there, we went to Italy and did our combat in Italy. Returning to the States in September, on a troop train passing through Indiana into St. Louis, we received the word that the Japanese had surrendered.
And Norman, you mentioned that you were at the Aleutian campaign. Is there anything you can recall about that time there at Kiska or the Aleutians? Anything that stands out about that particular campaign?
Well, the campaign itself was composed of Canadians as well as the American troops. And the Americans came in from the Bering Sea side and experienced strong winds, which anything we tried to erect there was blown away from us before we could get it erected. Eventually we got some heavy cat tractors in there and dug holes for us so we could set our tents down in them. We stayed there until December, and in December we left, came back to the States to Camp Carson, which is now Fort Carson, Colorado, and from there up to Camp Hale,
Sometimes there are some soldiers that have some experiences or there are thoughts of when they're first going to go into battle. And I know at the time you believed that there were Japanese on Kiska. You did your amphibious training, I think, at Pendleton, and that if you were, can you recall what your thoughts were, maybe the day prior or before getting on your landing crafts to actually invade on the island?
Well, the troop ships that we were on, when we left San Francisco, shipped out of San Francisco, which we were on the USS Dorian, which was a new amphibious concept for the Navy. And and they had just taken it on a shakedown cruise. It was the fantail was to open up so they could launch things. Found out its superstructure was too much, and it took almost a list of laid it on its side. Plus, it leaked from the opening on the fantail. So we were a little bit apprehensive on our mode of transportation to the Aleutian Islands. And once we got to ADAC, then we boarded the San Miguel to go to our invasion of Kiska. And San Miguel had rats on it about as big as the rest of us. So Kiska was an experience because it was an entirely different terrain and it was involved with it, tundra. And it's very deceptive. You think you've got a solid ground underneath you and you step off in a hole.
It was quite an experience there on those Aleutian Islands. And you came back and you did some training at Hale, but eventually you went to the European campaign and spent your time in Italy. And is there anything, an anecdote or a story or something you can remember specifically that stands out in the Italian campaign?
Well, the experience personally that I had was with our regimental commander, Colonel Fowler, who joined our group when we got back to Camp Hale from the Aleutians. He was a World War I veteran machine gunner and also a West Point graduate. And Colonel Fowler had a son that was killed in the invasion of Normandy on the second day of the invasion. They were the same age as myself, so Colonel Fowler and myself had a close relationship in that. And one of the things that he stressed to me is make the events of the day, your buddies getting killed, as being part of the routine for the day and not build inside of you. The emotions that accompanies these tragic events. And it proved. I was wounded on Mount Belvedere on the next day after our initial invasion. And 2 days later, Colonel Fowler was wounded. So we were back in the 36th Vac Hospital at the same time, and then we returned to the line at the same time. But Colonel Fowler, I don't know whether he has been given his dues in this side, but he was where his men were, he was. And what his men tolerated, he tolerated with his experiences.
So you had a lot of respect for Colonel Fowler.
He was one of a kind.
You mentioned that you were wounded on Belvedere. Can you tell us what happened leading up to that event?
Well, we started the invasion at around midnight, and the day that I was wounded, the following day, we were working with radio silence, so we was using strictly wire communications, and we had temporarily lost communications with the 1st Battalion. Was trying to reach them, Colonel Fowler. We were afoot walking from Belvedere to that, and we started back from the battalion headquarters, going back to where we set up for regimental headquarters, and engaged a wire party coming up, laying the line, and Colonel Fowler wanted to use the line. And we was 2 wiremen and Colonel himself had stopped, and this was all in a snowy field. And they probably from the River Ridge area, we were under observation by the Germans, and they threw a cluster of 5 88 rounds at on us, and I was struck by by one of them, and elected to evacuate myself. Colonel Fowler put a tourniquet to my leg, and I came out of that thing, and the Lord was with me because I went right through a landmine field back to the aid station.
And then you returned to your unit at what point?
Colonel Fowler and I went back to the unit, I think about the 12th, somewhere days of April. If my memory serves me correct, and I'm not real good on dates, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, I believe, died on April the 14th, and we had returned to our regiment just a few days before that.
What do you remember about your closest buddies there in your unit or outfit, either during training or combat?
Well, we tried to be a fun group. And maybe too much fun at times. But in this part of the counseling that Colonel Fowler did, he says, you know, accept your buddy for the day and hope that there is for you tomorrow. And we maintained, as the reunion is indicated, that the same thing held true through the rest of the units.
What did you do after the war?
Went back to school, University of Texas, hook 'em horn.
And then after college?
After college, I joined, which was then called Tennessee Gas Transmission, Natural Gas Transmission Company, which later became Tenneco, and worked for them for 35 years before retiring, and retired in '88. So since '88, I've done a lot of honeydew work, and my wife and I have traveled. Just got back from Italy.
What was it like being back in Italy, or have you been back to those places?
I went back in '96 when we had the 50th reunion, or 94 for the 50th reunion, and it was an emotional experience.
In what ways?
Well, the events, the things that took place, they kind of relive themselves within you. When you start walking over some of the grounds that you experience casualties and all that.
And this last time you went to Italy?
This was just a social visit. We did stop one day there at the cemetery in Florence, our military cemetery there in Florence. And that's an experience too.
And if you had to sum up just your time being with the 10th, what would you kind of say?
I was glad I made it. I'm a native Houstonian, and snow, I think I'd seen snow twice in my lifetime. Not much of that because it snows for 10 or 15 minutes or maybe 30 minutes, and then that's it for another decade. So it was a new experience. I think the benefits of being in it was worth it.
Thank you, Norman. That was very